Conflict, regional rivalries maybe, and that's climate change. Longest river, the Euphrates, dries up.
Hey, your butt's the only thing left.
Holy shit.
Nice.
A hidden chamber beneath the Euphrates River has just been exposed, uncovered by a deep rupture in the earth that should not exist. Inside, researchers found walls covered in warnings, carved in 17 ancient languages, all saying the same thing: do not unseal. At the center of the chamber stood 4 massive chains anchored into solid bedrock. But the chains were not intact. They were broken, and they were empty. Since that moment, the region has changed. Tremors, sightings, unexplained disturbances. Jesus warned that when this begins, people would not recognize what they are looking at. The chains, the metal, and what the breaks revealed. The Euphrates River has been shrinking for years. Satellites confirmed it, governments monitored it, scientists logged it. But nobody understood what the river was actually uncovering as it pulled back. Then a geological team was called in. They had been tracking the recession for months, and something in the riverbed readings was not adding up. The ground beneath the receding water was behaving strangely. Pressure readings were off. Soil composition in certain zones did not match the surrounding area. The lead geologist on the team later said he knew something was buried down there before they ever started digging. He just did not know what. They brought in heavy equipment. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed first, scanning deep beneath the riverbed. What came back on the monitors made the team run the scan 3 times before anyone spoke. The radar was showing a hollow space underground, large, structured, and completely sealed. Not a natural air pocket, not a geological gap, a chamber. It took days of careful excavation to reach it. The machines could only do so much before the risk of collapse forced them to slow down and work by hand. When they finally broke through, the entrance they uncovered stopped everyone cold. It was not jagged or broken the way a natural collapse looks. The angles were clean. The geometry was deliberate. This was not something erosion created over time. This was something that had been sealed and was now open. Inside, at the center of the chamber, stood 4 massive chains. Each one was anchored into solid bedrock at exact positions: north, south, east, and west. The investigators looked at the layout and reached a conclusion quickly. The chamber had not been built beside the chains. It had been built around them. This entire space existed for a single purpose: to hold something in place. The metal was the first thing that broke the team's composure. There were no welds anywhere on the chains, no tool marks, no fractures from construction. Every link was completely seamless, as if the chain had never been assembled at all, as if it had simply always existed in that form. Analysis confirmed what nobody wanted to say out loud. To produce metal like that would require temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than the outer surface of the sun. No ancient civilization came anywhere close to that capability. Even with modern industrial technology, replicating it would be extraordinarily difficult. These chains were not made by anything human. Then someone reached out and touched one. They pulled their hand back immediately. The chain was warm, not slightly. Unmistakably warm, the way metal feels when heat is actively moving through it. Thermal scans were brought in and confirmed what made no sense. The surrounding rock was cold. The heat was not coming from the earth around the chains. It was coming from inside the metal itself, localized, steady, and continuous, with no identifiable source. Something had been generating heat inside those chains, apparently for thousands of years, with nothing around it to explain how. But the worst detail was still waiting. The chains were broken. When the fracture points were examined closely, the break pattern showed force applied from the inside outward, not from outside pressure, not from geological stress. Whatever was restrained in those chains had pulled against them with such force that it tore through restraints embedded in solid bedrock and walked out. Ancient Sumerian clay tablets, written thousands of years before the Bible existed, describe divine beings held beneath the earth along the Great River, restrained by chains in a sealed underground location. The geographic description matches the Euphrates basin. The physical description matches what was found in this chamber. This account does not begin with Scripture. It is older than Scripture. And Revelation 9:14 and 9:15 complete the picture, describing 4 beings bound at the Euphrates, held until a fixed hour, a specific day, month, and year, all prepared in advance. This was not an escape. This was a release that had been scheduled long before any living person was born. And carved across every wall surrounding those broken chains, in languages from across the entire ancient world, was a message making clear that this moment had been anticipated for thousands of years. The message nobody was supposed to see. Before the investigators read a single word on those walls, they noticed the symbols. Carved in a descending sequence from the upper wall downward, each symbol was slightly different from the one before it. Archaeologists studied the pattern carefully and confirmed it was not decorative. It was not religious art. It functioned as a countdown, a sequence measuring toward a specific point, getting closer with each carving until it reached the bottom of the wall. There was no starting point visible anywhere. Only the final stages of the count had been left behind. Whoever carved this did not want anyone to know when the clock started. They only left what was necessary, the approach to the end. Then the investigators turned to the rest of the walls and the room went silent. The same message was carved across the entire chamber in 17 different ancient languages: Sumerian, Akkadian, Aramaic, Old Persian. Civilizations that existed centuries apart in different regions with no documented communication between them, and every single one of them had written the exact same words. Do not unseal, held until the appointed time. But it was not just the languages that were different. The handwriting was different. The carving styles were different. The depth of the cuts, the spacing of the letters, the way each script was shaped, all of it pointed to different hands, different tools, different people from completely different periods of history. This was not one group of people writing in multiple languages. This was multiple groups, separated by centuries, each coming to this same wall and adding their version of the same warning, as if each civilization somehow knew the others had already been here, as if each one felt the weight of what was sealed in that chamber and could not leave without adding their voice to the warning. Let that sit for a moment. These cultures did not trade with each other. They did not share writing systems. Some of them did not even exist at the same time. For the same message to appear in all of their languages inside one chamber, something had to coordinate that. Something reached across centuries and across entire civilizations to make sure this warning existed in every language that mattered. And whatever that something was, it never signed its name. In the entire ancient world, every important inscription named its author. Kings carved their titles. Priests carved their gods. Nobody wrote anything significant anonymously. But this warning carries no name, no seal, no claim of authorship. The absence of a signature on a message this coordinated is not an oversight. It is its own kind of terror. The Book of Enoch, a text so significant it is directly quoted in the New Testament book of Jude, gives this specific context. It describes the binding of beings called the Watchers, a class of powerful non-human entities imprisoned by divine order. It states clearly that warnings were carved at the site of their imprisonment so that future generations would recognize the location and know not to interfere. The chamber matches this account in precise structural detail. Daniel 12. 4 records God telling the prophet that certain words would be sealed until the time of the end. Revelation 5. 1 describes a scroll that cannot be opened until the appointed moment. The pattern runs through the entire Bible. Some things were not lost to history. They were deliberately preserved, hidden, and locked until a specific point in time when they were always meant to be found. That point has now arrived. The countdown reached its end. The chamber was opened, the warning was read, and by the internal logic of the inscription itself, the appointed time is no longer approaching. It is here. The civilizations who carved these walls never lived to see what they were warning against. They wrote anyway in every language they could reach, for people they would never meet. That level of urgency across that many cultures should have been enough to make anyone stop. But the chamber was opened, and the moment investigators stepped past the threshold, the space inside made clear that something already knew they were there. The chamber environment. The moment investigators crossed into the inner chamber, something changed, not gradually, immediately. The temperature dropped so fast that breath became visible within seconds. Frost began forming along the edges of the stone walls. The team checked the readings from the deeper rock surrounding the chamber and found nothing. No cooling, no temperature drop, no explanation. The cold existed only inside that specific space, sharp at its edges, as though something was actively maintaining it, as though the chamber was being kept cold on purpose. Then the air started behaving strangely. Oxygen levels fluctuated in ways that sealed cave systems simply do not produce. Chemical compounds appeared in atmospheric readings that have no business existing in an enclosed underground space. These were not byproducts of rock chemistry or geological decay. Decomposition leaves chemical traces. Respiration leaves chemical traces. Every biological process leaves a signature in the air around it. If those compounds were present in a chamber sealed for thousands of years, something had been producing them. Something had been breathing in there. Team members began feeling it before the instruments confirmed anything. Vertigo arrived first, then a slowing of thought, a heaviness in the limbs, and a persistent sense of pressure against the chest, even though pressure readings showed nothing unusual. Their bodies were responding to something that the equipment was not built to measure. Here is where science adds something disturbing rather than explaining it away. Infrasound is sound that exists below the range of human hearing. Studies have shown that specific infrasonic frequencies, particularly those around 18 to 19 Hertz, cause feelings of intense dread, the physical sensation of a presence standing nearby, visual disturbances, nausea, and disorientation. The effects the team experienced inside that chamber match infrasound exposure precisely. That does not make the situation less frightening. It makes it more, because something was generating that frequency inside a sealed underground space that had been locked for thousands of years. And then, beneath all of it, they felt the pulse. Instruments detected a rhythmic vibration rising from beneath the chamber floor. It was not seismic. It was not mechanical interference from equipment. It repeated at consistent, even intervals, slow and patient, like something enormous breathing far below the stone. It did not speed up. It did not slow down. It simply continued, steady and deliberate, completely indifferent to the presence of the team above it. Every anomaly in that chamber operated within defined boundaries. The cold stopped at the threshold. The chemical compounds were contained to the sealed air. The pulse came from directly below the floor and nowhere else. This was not a natural cave behaving unusually. Something patient was waiting beneath that floor. And the floor of that chamber had already given up its most disturbing evidence. It was written in dust that had not moved for centuries. The footprints. The floor of the chamber was covered in a fine layer of stone dust. It had not been disturbed in centuries. No collapse, no water movement, no air current had touched it. It lay perfectly flat, perfectly still, the way dust settles in a space where absolutely nothing has moved for a very long time. Until investigators looked closer. Pressed into that undisturbed dust were footprints. 4 sets, each one clear, structured, and deliberate. They showed defined heel impact, mid-foot pressure, and the push-off of forward movement. This was not an accidental impression. This was not a collapse pattern. Whatever made these prints was walking upright, in full control of its body, fully aware of where it was going. The weight analysis came back, and the lead investigator reportedly went quiet for a long time before he spoke. Each set of prints indicated a body weighing between 400 and 500 pounds, not spread unevenly the way an injured or unstable body would distribute weight, perfectly balanced, precisely controlled. 4 separate entities, each one carrying roughly 4 times the mass of a grown man, moving without a single sign of struggle or imbalance. The stride length was worse. The distance between each step was far beyond what human legs can produce without mechanical assistance. Biomechanical modeling indicated that the limbs responsible for these prints were significantly longer and structurally stronger than anything in the known human range. There was no dragging, no hesitation, no indication of adjustment to an unfamiliar environment. These bodies moved as if the space around them offered no resistance at all. The dust itself told a part of the story that the footprints alone could not. Instead of compressing inward beneath each step the way soft material normally does, the particles were displaced outward in every direction from the point of impact. Under a microscope, the pattern looked like a shock wave, force driving down, then exploding forward with momentum. The ground did not simply hold the weight, it absorbed an impact. But the detail that made investigators stop and look at each other was the starting point. The prints did not begin in the center of the chamber. They did not begin near the entrance. Each set of prints began at the exact location of each chain. Where the restraint had held something in place, that is precisely where the first step was taken. The chain held it, and when the chain broke, it stood up and walked. All 4 sets moved in the same direction. No wandering, no circling, no overlap between the 4 sets. They moved in formation, coordinated, purposeful, directly toward the deeper passageways at the back of the chamber. And there were no return tracks. Not one print leading back. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain a fragment called the Book of Giants, which describes beings of immense physical size imprisoned by divine decree after the flood. Beings whose proportions match what the compression analysis of these prints produced. This is a recovered ancient document. It is not legend. It describes exactly the category of being whose footprints now existed in front of the investigation team. 4 sets, no return. Moving deeper into a cave system that geological surveys confirm connects to an extensive underground network. They did not escape into open air. They went further underground with direction, with coordination, and with what could only be described as a plan already in place before the chains ever broke. And when thermal imaging was sent into the deeper sections of that cave, one of them had not gone far yet. The entity. What the camera found standing in the dark. The thermal imaging camera was sent into a section of the cave that had been considered completely inaccessible. No investigator had entered it. No equipment had reached it. The feed came back, and the operator stopped breathing for a moment. Something was standing in there. The heat signature was not distortion. It was not equipment error. It was structured, consistent, and unmistakably the outline of a body. Stationary at first. Then, slowly, it shifted its position. It was aware the camera was there. The proportions did not match anything in the known biological record. The limbs were elongated far beyond human range. The upper frame was broad and built entirely for power rather than for balance or agility. The overall scale of the figure suggested a physical mass that would have matched exactly what the footprint compression analysis had already calculated. This was one of the 4. Then came the detail that made several team members step back from their monitors. The skull had 2 horns, not attached, not added, grown directly out of the bone, fused into the cranial structure as though they had always been there, as natural to this creature as a jawbone or a rib cage. In ancient Mesopotamian art spanning thousands of years, divine and semi-divine beings are consistently depicted with horns on their heads, not as symbols of evil, but as biological markers of a being that existed in a completely different category from humanity, above it, older than it, and operating by entirely different rules. What the thermal imaging found in that cave was not wearing a crown. It had grown those horns. They were part of what it was. Two members of the team refused to continue after seeing the feed. They left the site that night and did not return. The ones who stayed later described a specific moment when the atmosphere in the monitoring room shifted, when the data stopped feeling like a discovery and started feeling like a warning they had already ignored. Then the team directed a light source toward the figure, and something happened that nobody could explain. The light did not reflect. Normally, any surface, whether rock, water, skin, or metal, reflects light back toward its source. That is simply how light works. But the figure absorbed it. The edges of its form blurred under direct illumination as though the boundary between the entity and the surrounding air was not fixed. Standard tracking systems lost focus on it repeatedly. In ancient Jewish theological tradition and in early Mesopotamian religious texts, there are specific descriptions of a class of being whose presence inverts the normal behavior of the physical world around it, beings that do not follow the same rules as ordinary matter. This was not a monster story. This was a documented theological category, and what was standing in that cave matched it. Then the team noticed the eyes. Even in near total darkness, the figure's eyes were returning the infrared signal directly back toward the sensors. Both eyes, forward-facing, locked in the direction of the camera. The operator later described the moment he realized it was not simply present in the space. It was watching. It had been watching from the moment the camera entered. It knew exactly where the sensor was, and it had not moved, not because it was unaware, but because it was choosing not to. The audio equipment recorded something next, a low vocalization from the figure's position. It did not travel through the cave the way sound normally moves in an enclosed stone space. It pressed. Team members monitoring the feed remotely at reduced volume reported tightness in their chests, nausea, and a disorientation that arrived without warning. The sound was below the threshold of human hearing. Nobody heard it. Everybody felt it. The Book of Enoch and early Babylonian religious texts both contain descriptions of sounds produced by bound divine beings that caused physical illness and deep disturbance in any human who encountered them. The team did not need ancient texts to confirm it. They felt it through a monitor in a separate room. When the light was increased to its highest setting, the figure moved. Not in panic, not with any sign of fear. It turned and walked, slowly and with complete control, deeper into the cave, into sections that geological surveys had mapped as structurally inaccessible. It did not retreat. It simply continued, as though the camera, the light, and the team behind them were a minor inconvenience on the way to somewhere it was already going. It was moving in the same direction as the footprints, and what happened above the ground in the hours and days that followed made it devastatingly clear that whatever left that chamber had not stayed underground. The surface response. Within hours of the chamber being opened, the ground above it began to break. A powerful earthquake struck near the Iraq-Turkey border with no tectonic explanation. There is no active fault line in that area capable of producing what was recorded. By every standard in geological science, this event should not have happened. But it did, and when the scans came back, what they showed disturbed the analysts more than the quake itself. The rupture extended nearly 60 miles underground. Earthquakes fracture rock in irregular branching patterns, dispersing energy in multiple directions. This rupture did not do that. It cut in a straight, clean, consistent line as though something had drawn it deliberately from below. Geological analysts used a phrase that almost never appears in scientific literature. They called it structurally intentional. Let that land. In the days that followed, roads collapsed without warning. Buildings tilted not from shaking, but from the ground beneath them simply dropping away. Wide depressions opened in the soil in a synchronized pattern along the rupture's path. And when thermal imaging was pointed at the fault line, geometric heat signatures appeared beneath the surface, pulsing at controlled intervals. The exact same pattern of contained energy that had been documented inside the chamber itself. Above ground, storm systems formed across Turkey, Syria, and Iraq with no meteorological warning. Rivers rose faster than rainfall totals could explain, pressing outward into cities as if driven by pressure from below. Electronic systems near the anomaly zones failed without identifiable cause. Communication dropped. Navigation malfunctioned. Power fluctuated in areas where infrastructure was physically undamaged. The specific failure profile matches what military and intelligence agencies have documented in classified assessments of unexplained aerial phenomena. What was disrupting electronics on the ground and what people were seeing in the sky were not two separate events. Multiple witnesses in different towns with no contact with each other reported the same internal experience at the same time: a sudden heaviness, a collapse of clear thinking, a dread with no visible source. Something was affecting human perception directly, not through anything the senses could identify. The animals registered it before any instrument did. Dogs refused to leave shelter, night insects vanished from entire regions, livestock stopped moving. Multiple species can detect infrasound and electromagnetic shifts far below the range of human perception. When animals across a wide region shut down at the same time, they are responding to something real. They wanted no part of whatever was moving through that area. Then came the sky. Glowing figures were reported moving at consistent speed through violent storm conditions, completely unaffected by winds that were destroying structures on the ground. Their sightings clustered at the peaks of storm intensity. The disturbance in the air and the presence above it were arriving together. Every ring of disturbance traces back to the same point: the chamber, the broken chains, the open passageways. To understand why all of this is happening at this specific river, you have to understand what the Euphrates has meant from the very first page of Scripture to its very last, and why Jesus pointed to this exact moment by name. The Convergence, the river, the prophecy, and the warning Jesus left. The Euphrates does not appear in the Bible by accident. In Genesis 2:14, it is named as one of the 4 rivers of Eden, part of the original world before everything broke. It was not a border or a warning in the beginning. It was part of a creation that was still whole. But as history moved forward, the river changed its meaning. God told Abraham that the promised land would stretch all the way to the Euphrates at its furthest edge. It marked the outer boundary of blessing. Then, when Israel fell into disobedience, they were carried into exile across that same river. The boundary of blessing became the road into judgment. The Euphrates has always been the line between what God holds and what consequences look like on the other side of it. By the time Revelation was written, the river had one final role. Revelation 16:12 says it will dry up to prepare the way for what comes next. Not as a metaphor, as a physical event. Satellites have been confirming for years that the river is measurably receding. That is the fulfillment of a specific sign recorded in the last book of Scripture, happening right now. Revelation 9:15 does not describe 4 generic supernatural beings. Within biblical scholarship and ancient Jewish texts, these 4 are a specific class of entity associated with judgment on a civilizational scale, bound at the Euphrates because that river was the boundary of the known world in ancient cosmology. Their binding was the sealing of that boundary. Their release is its removal. What is happening at the Euphrates is not a local event. It is the oldest boundary in recorded human history being taken down. Jesus was asked directly what the signs of his return would look like. His answer is in Luke 21, nations in distress, the sea roaring, people collapsing from fear at what is coming upon the world. And then he said this, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Throughout Scripture, the word powers refers to a specific class of supernatural beings, the exact class whose binding at the Euphrates Revelation 9 documents. Their release is the shaking Jesus described. He named it. He warned about it. Matthew 24:33 records him saying that when you see all these things together, you will know it is near. Not one sign, all of them. A rupture with impossible geometry, chains nothing human could have made. warnings in 17 languages from civilizations that never communicated, an entity on thermal imaging that absorbed light and watched back, synchronized dread across entire populations. A river Scripture said would dry up, drying up. These are not separate curiosities. They are the all these things Jesus named, arriving together. The pattern before a threshold is crossed in Scripture is never sudden chaos. It is quiet convergence. Before the flood, life was normal until the door of the ark was shut. Before the Exodus, Egypt functioned until the final night. The convergence is always visible and almost always dismissed by the people living through it. The parable of the 10 virgins does not divide people based on who knew and who did not. All 10 knew. The division was between who was ready and who was not. What has been uncovered beneath the Euphrates, in the ground, in the sky, and inside the experience of people across the region is not new information for anyone who has read these words carefully. It is the arrival of what was always written. The only question Jesus left open was the one he asked himself. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? That question is not rhetorical. It is directed at every person watching this right now.